You are better than you think. Right, this is really important. You come across to your listeners better than you think you do. You know, people's attention spans are so quick. Anything that you can do to keep people awake and following you is going to help. I always say, get out from behind the lectern. What about these things? Yeah, I mean, you just want to cut them off and just get rid of them. And couldn't feel worse. And you got to protect your ribs because somebody might, kick your ribs. My pockets are empty. That was his presentation. I mean, he could have saved these poor people and just emailed them. They have all this nervous energy, and we just want to get it done with. The human mind is a wonderful organ. Starts working the moment you're born and never stops until you get up to speak in public. My goal here is to give you 3 things. If you can walk out of today with 3 things that will help you become a better presenter, then today will have been a complete success. Think of public speaking as being a bunch of one-on-one conversations. So if I stand up here right now and I look out, there's maybe 50, 75, 100 people that I don't know staring at me. That's pretty daunting. But if instead I just look at one person at a time and I have these one-on-one conversations, we're all comfortable with those because we have them every day. So you just focus on one person for a thought and then choose somebody else, talk to them for a thought or a sentence or a phrase, and that way you can connect with everybody in the room. You are better than you think. Right, this is really important. You come across to your listeners better than you think you do. I see this all the time because we do videotaping, and then I sit down with my clients and force them to watch their videotapes. Anybody ever see yourself speak on tape before? Yeah. Anybody enjoy it? No. Nobody enjoys it. But it's an incredibly valuable thing to do for your own speaking skills. But what happens most of the time is I'll sit down with someone, and by the way, they try and pay me to not make them watch these tapes. They also try and buy their colleagues' tapes, and they're expensive, because I will sell them, but they're expensive. But what happens is I sit down with them, they watch the tapes, and by the end, they go, oh, I'm not nearly as bad as I thought I was. I was working with a client last year, investment banker. We had this whole section on body language, and then we went to a break. And she came back in and she said, she was so excited, she said, you guys aren't going to believe this. I went down to the meeting. She went down to talk to some bankers who were meeting, and she said, I went down to talk to them, and I was doing my usual thing. She said, I kind of leaned up against the wall like this, and I was talking to them, and people were kind of paying attention, but not really. And she said, and then I remembered what we had just talked about, so I stood up like this, and I put my hands down, and I walked up to where they were. She said she could see everybody shift. They were putting their pens down, putting their PDAs down, and looking up at her. She could see their attention shift because of her body language. So people say, well, how do I move? I don't know how to move. Here's what you don't want to do. Often you see people speaking like this, and they're kind of like a caged tiger, they just pace back and forth. You don't want to, it's not constant movement, but it's movement with purpose. Now another thing about standing, if you're standing and presenting, you notice that I'm not standing behind the lectern today. Now, mind you, it's great as a speaker. These things are fantastic. You can lean on it, you put your notes on here, people throw anything, you can duck behind. In fact, I could give my whole talk back here. This is kind of cool. But you don't want to do that, right? Because it puts that barrier up there. So if you have notes, you can rest them on here, but I always say, get out from behind the lectern. People's attention spans are so quick. The average adult attention span is like 8 seconds. That's what we're dealing with when we're speaking. So anything that you can do, adding variety to your voice, moving around, firecrackers, anything that you can do to keep people awake and following you, it's going to help. What about these things? These are so difficult when we speak. What are some of the things people do with their hands when they're speaking? Pockets is one. This is one. Yeah, gesturing is another. I had a group recently, and I said, there's 3 things that you don't want to do with your hands when you're speaking. What are those? And a woman raised her hand and she yells out, obscene gestures. It's like, all right, there's 4 things don't want to do. So of those 4 things, we've got obscene gestures. What else do you not want to do with your hands when you're speaking? So pockets, I'm kind of on the fence. You'll see me doing this from time to time today. The thing you don't want to do with the pockets is if you have change in them, you don't want to jingle them. My pockets are empty. So what else? What else do you not want to do with your hands? Sorry? Biting nails. So there's 5 things you don't want to do. I had a guy in one of my workshops, and the whole time he was speaking, his hands were just like this. The typical guy story. His hands were like this. And finally I said, Chuck, what is with the hands? And he goes, oh, well, I'm a black belt in karate, and you got to protect your ribs because somebody might, kick your ribs. So we went around, made everybody in the course promise they weren't going to kick Chuck in the ribs. I'd kick him in the knees, but not the ribs. And so he could let his hands down. Every Toastmasters club has an evil person. An evil person who's called the counter. All right, there's a few heads nodding. The counter is there to write down every time you say like, all of those things. Another one is basically. Right? Basically what I'm trying to say is, at the end of the day, so she went to her husband one day and she said, sweetheart, you're driving me crazy because you always say basically. So what did he do? He switched to essentially. Talk about openings and closings. Somebody brought that up earlier. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to hear Jane Goodall speak in San Francisco. Everybody know Jane Goodall? Have you seen her speak? Have you? So I don't know if she did this when you spoke, but she studied chimpanzees in Africa. She's world famous. Came out on stage, got several hundred people in the audience, and she opened with a chimpanzee call. She hadn't said a word. She just opened with this fantastic chimpanzee call. Now, I'll spare you that right now because my wife actually does it better than I do, but I doubt we could get her to do it. She opened with this chimpanzee call, and everybody was just riveted on her. So what are some good, aside from a chimp call, what are some good ways to open a talk? Sorry? A dog bark. See, I've never heard that one before. Dog bark is one? Yes. Sorry? A story. Stories are great. A joke, if it's well done, obviously you've got to be careful with humor, but absolutely some humor. What else? Yeah. Asking a question's great. Just get the audience involved right away. I had a guy in my workshop over the weekend, funny guy, he's an Irish guy, and he's telling this story. He works for the Irish government to help attract businesses to come do business in Ireland. And he's a young guy, and he said he was going in to do a big presentation, big business presentation. And he had this dancing hula girl as a screensaver, and every once in a while, just totally random, she'll come dancing out onto his screen, and she's just wearing a grass skirt, right? So here he's making this business presentation, and he forgot to turn off the dancing hula girl, and all of a sudden she came hulaing out onto his screen. Yeah, I don't think that company's doing business in Ireland. One of my favorite quotes says that the human mind is a wonderful organ. Starts working the moment you're born and never stops until you get up to speak in public.